Hey everyone! Welcome back to DevCraft Projects. In today's video, we're going to build a blissful project, a counter app with limit alerts using just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. This app is not just a basic counter. It comes with a maximum and minimum limit, shows alert messages when those limits are reached, and also disables the buttons accordingly. It's a great project to practice manipulation, event handling, and simple logic building in JavaScript. So let's not waste any more time and jump straight into the folder setup. Alright, so the first step is to create a new folder for our project. I'm naming this folder Counter App with Limit Alerts. You can name it whatever you like, but keeping it relevant helps stay organized. Once the folder is created, I'm going to open it in Visual Studio Code. My favorite code editor, now inside this folder, will create 3 files. First, an HTML file called index.html. Second, a CSS file named style.css, and third, a JavaScript file named script.js. These 3 files will make up the structure, styling, and logic of our project. Alright, now let's begin by writing the HTML. Start by using the boilerplate shortcut in VS Code. Just type an exclamation mark and hit enter. This gives us the basic structure of an HTML5 document. I've also added a title that says Counter App with Limit Alerts. This will be shown in the Browser tab. Then we link our external CSS file using style.css so we can write our styling separately. Now, moving into body, we create a main container using a div with the class container. This helps us keep all elements centered and styled together inside. This container, I'm using an H1 heading that says Counter, and next to it, I've placed a span with the ID count. This span is where the actual counter number will be displayed, and it starts at 0. Below the heading, we have a buttons div with class. This wraps 3 buttons, one for increment with the ID inc, one for decrement with the ID dec, and one for reset with the ID reset. These buttons will help control the counter value when clicked. And finally, we have a p tag with the ID message that says max limit reached. This message will be shown when the counter hits its limit, either the max or the minimum. At the very end of the body, I've linked the JavaScript file using script.js. This will handle all the logic of our counter app, and that wraps up the HTML structure. Let's open it in the browser to see what we've got so far. I'm right-clicking anywhere inside the HTML file and selecting Open with Live Server. You can see we have our main heading, Counter, 0, and below that we have our increment, decrement, and reset buttons at the bottom. There's also a message saying max limit reached, but it's always visible right now. Don't worry, we'll fix that with CSS later. Let's jump into the CSS next and give our app a clean and modern look. First, I'm selecting all elements on the page using the universal selector. This is a common CSS reset. It removes the default spacing that browsers apply and sets the box sizing to border box, which makes it easier to manage paddings and widths across all elements. Now let's style the body tag. We're using Flexbox here to perfectly center our app, both horizontally and vertically. The height is set to 100 VH, which means 100% of the viewport height. That ensures our app is always centered no matter the screen size. Finally, we've added a beautiful pink gradient background from left to right, giving it a soft and elegant look. Now let's style the main wrapper, the container that holds everything inside the app. So here's what we're doing. Setting the container width to 40% with a max width of 450 pixels. This keeps the layout responsive on all screen sizes. We've added 3 rem of padding inside for good spacing. The border is 3px solid crimson to match our app's theme. Rounded corners, using border radius 1 rem, give it a nice smooth look. Position relative will help later when we position alert messages inside the box. And finally, we've applied a shadow. To lift the container from the background and make it pop, let's now style the heading. The H1 tag is centered, and the font size is set to 3 rem to make it big and readable. It's the main focus after all. Inside the H1, we have a span tag that holds the live counter number. So let's give it a standout color. This gives the number a bold red color, making it visually distinct from the rest of the text. Now let's style our button container that holds all three buttons: increment, decrement, and reset. We're using Flexbox to arrange the buttons in a row with display flex, centering them horizontally and vertically using justified content center. And alignitum center, the gap of 1 rem adds equal spacing between the buttons. And margin top to rem pushes the button group away from the counter. Now, we'll style each individual button. Each button takes up 1/3 of the width, so they sit evenly side by side. The padding gives them some breathing space, and we use the same crimson color for the border and background to keep a consistent theme. Rounded corners, bold white text, and a smooth 0.5 seconds transition make them both functional and visually appealing. And of course, cursor or pointer gives that clickable feel. Finally, let's add a hover effect to make the interaction feel smooth and responsive. On hover, we invert the colors. The background turns light and the text becomes crimson. It adds a clean and interactive look when users move their mouse over the buttons. Now let's style the button in its disabled state. So when we reach the counter limits, the disabled buttons look visually distinct and clearly inactive. We change the button's background to a light gray and the text and border color to a muted gray. Most importantly, we set cursor not allowed. This tells users that the button can't be clicked right now. This small change greatly improves user experience by giving visual feedback when the counter is at its min or max limit. Now let's move on to styling our message box. This is the alert that appears when the user hits the maximum or minimum counter. Value, we set the font size to 1.2 rem for good readability and keep the text black on a white background for contrast. Display, block, and text align center ensure the text is neatly placed in the middle. The box takes up 50% of the container's width, with some padding inside and a crimson border to match the theme. The position absolute, along with tap negative 20 pixels and left, 25% places the message slightly above the main container. The border radius gives it rounded corners. And transition all 0.5 seconds ease makes it appear and disappear smoothly. But the most important part here is opacity, 0. By default, we hide the message using this opacity setting. Then we create a second class show, which will toggle using JavaScript when we want the message to be visible. When this show class is added dynamically, the message fades into view thanks to our transition, and when it's removed, it fades back out, a clean, animated feedback for the user. Let's start writing our JavaScript logic. The first thing we need to do is grab all the important elements from our HTML so we can interact with them through JavaScript. This line selects the span element inside the heading, which displays the current counter value. We're storing it in a constant called counter. And we use a document.querySelector hashtag count to target it by its ID. We'll be updating this span dynamically when the buttons are clicked. This grabs the increment button using its ID inc. We store it in a constant named incton, and we'll use this to add a click event that increases the counter. Similarly, this line selects the decrement button using its ID dec. We save it inside a variable called dec, and later we'll add an event to decrease the counter. This selects the reset button, which will be used to reset the counter back to 0. Again, we're using its ID and saving it inside the reset being constant. Lastly, we select the message box element, the one that shows max limit reached or min limit reached. We store it in a constant named MSG, and we'll use this to toggle the visibility of the message based on the counter value. First, we initialize a variable called count and set its value to 0. This count will hold our current counter value whenever a button is clicked, whether it's increment, decrement, or reset. This count variable will be updated and reflected on the screen. Next, we create a function called updateUI. Inside this function, we simply update the text inside our counter display. That's the span element we selected earlier and set it equal to the current value of count. So anytime the value changes, this function will make sure the new number is displayed in real time. Now we add an event listener to the increment button. When this button is clicked, the first thing we do is increase the count by 1 using count++. After updating the value, we call updateUITO, reflect the new number in the browser. And then we call another function named logic.don't_worry. We'll define and explain this logic function later. It will handle important checks like whether the maximum or minimum limit is reached. We do the same thing for the decrement button. When the user clicks this button, we decrease the count by 1 using count-, then update the UI using the same updateUI function. Finally, we call logic to check whether any limits have been crossed or if any buttons should be disabled. And here's the logic for the reset button. When the user clicks reset, we simply set the count back to 0, then we update the UI and again call the logic function to make sure everything resets properly, including any alerts or button states. Now let's move on to the final and most important part of this project, the logic function. This function is responsible for setting the minimum and maximum limits for the counter, displaying alert messages when those limits are reached, and enabling or disabling the increment or decrement buttons accordingly. We begin with a condition. If count equals 0, this checks if the counter value has reached 0, which we've set as our minimum limit. If the count is 0, we show a message on the screen saying, min_lim breached. This gives the user clear feedback that they can't decrease the count any further. We then add the show class to the message paragraph element. Remember, this class is what makes the alert message visible. Thanks to the CSS we wrote earlier, after showing the message, we disable the decrement button because the user shouldn't be allowed to go below 0. At the same time, we make sure the increment button is enabled, so the user can still increase the value from 0 and go up again. Next, we check another condition. Else, if count equals 10, this is our maximum limit for the counter. When the counter reaches 10, we want to alert the user that they've hit the upper limit. Just like before, we show a message, but this time it says max limit reached. And again, we apply the show class to make the message visible with animation. Here, we make sure the decrement button is still enabled, because the user should be allowed to reduce the count from 10 back to lower values, but we disable the increment button, so they can't go beyond 10. And finally, we handle the default case, which means the count is between 1 and 9, so no limits are reached. We simply hide the alert message by removing the show class from the message paragraph. Then we make both increment and decrement buttons fully active because the user can safely go up or down within the valid range. Alright, now that our entire project is complete, as you can see, our counter app is fully working. Clicking increment increases the number smoothly. When we reach 10, we see the max limit reached message, and the increment button becomes disabled. When we click decrement, it works again, and the message disappears. At 0, we get the min limit reached message, and the decrement button is now disabled, so everything is working just like we planned, including the styling, transitions, and logic. I hope this tutorial helped you understand how to build a counter app with smart limit alerts using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. If you enjoyed this video and learned something new today, please support my work by giving this video a like, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more front-end projects like this one.